I'm flattered to be asked to come up and talk to you guys a little bit about bootstrapping companies. It's something that I know all too much about. As we wait for slides, there we go. I just want to give a disclaimer that there's so many different types of businesses and companies that it is the wrong strategy with many companies to try to bootstrap. I think there's elements of bootstrapping that can be applied to all businesses and should be applied to all businesses. But specifically, my company started out in the vertical-based SaaS software space. And I think that there's a particularly great opportunity in B2B SaaS, vertical SaaS specifically, to bootstrap huge companies. And just if you have the right chemistry, the right components together, you can start a business without venture capital and create crazy amounts of value. There's opportunities all over the ecosystem for this. So I'll start out, and I'll just tell you a little bit about us. So we were founded in 2003 out of a business plan competition at BYU. Let's see here. So we've been covered or featured on the cover of Fortune Small Business Magazine, Entrepreneur magazines. As the slide suggests, we recently hit the milestone of $100 million in recurring revenue, which is pretty exciting for us. We have 1,400 employees globally, half of which are in India and are engineers. We have 1,000 clients that what we do, we build software for apartment communities. And all across the spectrum, 25 different solutions. We've got 1,000 companies. We sell to big companies, enterprise-level companies. 25,000 plus apartment communities across the United States use our stuff now. Of the professionally managed apartments in the United States, 1 out of 4 now is running our system. These are the different solutions that we've built as a company. We started out, and this is something that, as far as bootstrapping, one of the easiest ways to bootstrap is to find an area where there's greenfield opportunity, which means essentially that you found a space where there isn't much competition or very little competition, or you're doing something disruptive and changing the way things are done in an existing space. It's a lot easier to find a place, or basically get a lot of traction when there's not a lot of competition. In our space in 2003, we surveyed 500 apartment communities, and not one of them allowed online rent payment, which is pretty crazy. We found that only 17% of apartment communities had websites. So that's where we started. Grabbed huge land, got a ton of traction, and then went and just started to expand the product suite. So we've been able to expand our revenue in this specific vertical a tremendous amount. So we were doing about 70 cents per apartment in revenue here back in like 2009, and we're doing $2.70 per unit on our system today. And that's without ever raising prices on our clients. So we've been able to continue to add new products to the suite and just upsell and upsell and upsell and drive massive revenue growth for the company. So we've done insurance, utility billing, rent, price analytics, which is kind of supply-demand relationships, just a little bit of everything. So, but it's all technology or technology-enabled services. So I only have 20 minutes, so I'll go through this kind of quick, but I have a number of recommendations for any of you that are contemplating the possibility of taking a bootstrap model to your businesses. It's kind of funny that there are not metrics to measure value creation in the ecosystem. And so what we tend to look to find out if a company is being successful is we tend to look at how much money they raised, which is completely backwards. Another metric that is oftentimes used just by normal people to kind of gauge how successful you are is how many employees you have. Craigslist, I think, last time I heard, has like 80 employees. So employees are actually a negative indicator of your success. They're your expenses and shouldn't be boasted. So what is it then that what is it then that we should really look to benchmark success of our own entities as well as those in the ecosystem? And for me, it's value creation. For every dollar of capital that you put into the business, or of sweat equity, all the heartache and work that you put into growing a business, It's the value created based off that investment that really, again, it's hard to measure, but that's the true metric that we should be looking toward. And if you can put a bunch of cash into the business and create massive value, then amazing. But I find that we sometimes as entrepreneurs tend to over-raise capital, and it gets us into problems, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So the first recommendation that I have for people that want to bootstrap, well, I guess for any entrepreneur, is keep your ego in check. So this is a hard thing for us entrepreneurs because we probably wouldn't be entrepreneurs if we didn't have a big, fat, hungry ego. And certainly I do. So this is our office here that you can see. This is the office that we were in for 8 years. So from 2003 to 2011, we were in a little office next to the railroad tracks in Provo. And I think we were 19 million in revenue, recurring revenue, when we were still in this office. So we just clung, I mean, we just packed in there. It was crazy. I see billboards up and down the freeway for little startups. And sometimes I ask myself, is that the best use of resources? Maybe 1 billboard's good, but 5 billboards might not be necessary. So really just kind of keeping your ego in check and really kind of being analytical about the value that you're creating when you're spending money, or is it really to kind of pound my chest? So I don't think I have enough time to show this, but guerrilla marketing is an amazing area where you can create enormous value for so incredibly cheap. So if you look at things like the Dollar Shave Club or Blendtec or all these social media viral things that occur that drive massive clientele to a business, there are opportunities like that all over the place. And yet we tend to be lazy, I think, in marketing, and we don't look for those opportunities as much as we should. When you choose not to raise capital, that's your only choice. Some of the things that we did early on as a startup is we were competing against companies that were hundreds of millions of dollars in recurring revenue. So I think our biggest competitors around $500 million in revenue. And so there's no way we could compete with their marketing budgets. So we would go to these, there's this one trade show that we have every year that's it's the biggest trade show in our space. And we were this little tiny company. And so what we decided to do to try to look bigger than what we were is we went out and we'd hire temps. And we'd put them in our uniforms and have them just swarm the trade show floor. And so everybody thought we were this massive new company entering into the space, and we were really a tiny startup in the office that you just saw right there. But we literally had like 100 employees, or what appeared to be employees at this trade show. At the same show, we had there's like this party on Thursday night every year at this show. And there's thousands of people that come to it, and highly attended. These are all kind of the biggest decision makers in our space. And so companies would pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to sponsor this event and put their logos up on the wall, just like a hologram logo. And one, we couldn't afford it. But two, we felt like there was a way to get a lot more exposure. And so down in Vegas where the show was, we found this group called Knucklehead Zoo, which if there are any breakdancing enthusiasts in the room, probably know who these guys are. They're absolutely phenomenal. But these guys love what they do, and they are willing to do it very cheap. So we hired a bunch of them to come in and, again, dress like us. We were all kind of young Provo guys at the time. And so we hired these guys to come in, and they looked like employees. They fit right in with the group. But in this kind of party event, we had these guys for like 3 hours, spinning on their heads and doing windmills and all this crazy stuff. And so we had probably a third of the attendees at this thing just watching these guys break dance in our uniforms for like 2 hours straight. And we paid $1,000. So anyway, I mean, look for opportunities in marketing, whether it be through social media or other means. You can create enormous value. Okay, so here's just a bunch of kind of random smattering. But kind of the essence of all this is get your team right. So Nate, who was up here before, was touching on some really cool things, and I'd like to meet him actually. He was talking about architectural efficiency, and there are all these things in a software company that are so critical. When we first started our business, we spent 9 months building the first version of our product, only to find out that we did it wrong, and we had to scrap it and start over. And I lost over $100,000, which hurt really badly. We did a little bit of angel funding early on, which is basically why I stopped. I did my first round of funding at $1 million pre-money valuation, and I raised $125,000. So I gave up 12.5% of the company for that product that I had to scrap and start over, essentially. Those investors today, their investments, I think they're at a 400x return right now on their money. So they did well, and I'm happy for them. But I wasn't happy for me. So getting it right the first time is a tricky thing. Looks like I'm wigging out here. So if you look at, if you guys ever go watch the Lost interview by Steve Jobs, it's really kind of a fun use of 10 minutes. But he talks about how the best taxi drivers might get you to your destination 20% faster. But the best software programmers, engineers, can literally produce 10 times or maybe even 50 times the amount of output of engineers that aren't in that very unique group. And it's so, so true. In software development, in a big company like ours, you're going to see product managers, you're going to see project managers, you're going to see development managers, you're going to see engineers, and you're going to see then executives and strategic people in the business. And a mature software company usually has this framework. But in a startup, if you can get the right people that are cross-discipline, you can get all of that in a single person. And it's hyper efficient when you find people like that. And maybe you're that person who's starting the company. If you can get that, you can run circles around a company like mine that has to have 10 people that are all part of the process. So there's this huge advantage if you get those right key people. Everyone you hire in your company should be technical. I don't care if they're sales, I don't care, and again, this is mainly geared for a software company, but I actually think it applies to non-software companies as well, is you want technical people across your entire organization. So there's a company called Criteria Core that we use, that they do aptitude tests. And so every employee that comes and applies for us, we take aptitude tests. And then in certain disciplines, there's other tests as well that we add to it. But that aptitude is crazy. I remember when we had like 50 employees, and we first implemented these aptitude tests, we gave everybody in the business this test, and if I was to rank the output of our people in our business, it almost perfectly followed, with a few exceptions, that ranking on those aptitude tests. It was really, really eye-opening. And again, this is personal philosophy, so take it or leave it, but rolling up your sleeves and jumping in yourself, I think, is critical to a business. And if you don't know your business, you're not going to make the best strategic decisions, even if you have a ton of money in the bank. You're just not going to. You need to understand the domain. I'm actually a huge proponent of learning to code if you're going to start a tech company, particularly if you're going to bootstrap it. If you're still in a phase of life where you can allocate some of your credits in your education to learning to code, it's a phenomenal use of those resources, I believe. It's one of the best things that I ever did. And then lastly, I'll say communicate vision constantly. So don't let people in your organization not see the potential of what the business that you have, the tiger you have by the tail, so to speak. Make sure people understand it, and you will feel like a broken record. You're like, I just talked about this last month at the company meeting, but you just have to pound it and pound it and pound it. So the next thing is architecting for efficiency. So one of the things that we did at our company that created huge efficiency is outsourcing. It's tricky, it's super easy to fail with outsourcing, but it's one of the biggest untapped opportunities for a startup. In 2008, I literally moved. I had 2 engineers of my 6 that quit, and it was devastating. I felt like everybody was going to quit because of it. Like, how can we continue on? It's kind of one of those like make it or bring it moments in the company. And so I took the 20 grand a month that I had, from those two guys quitting. And I moved to India, and I lived in India for 8 months. And I hired 20 people with that same $20,000 per month. And then I went to 40 and 60 and 80 and 100. And within, I think, 2 years, I had 100 engineers out in India. We have 700 now. And we figured out that there is a way to really make outsourcing work, but it involves a ton of sacrifice on your part, on your people's part. If you're willing to move to India, you can, I would say, get a 3 to 5 times efficiency gain on your R&D budget. But you have to move to India. Next thing, go with your gut. People will constantly challenge you, which is a good thing. And after you've rationally heard their perspectives, go with your gut. I've made the mistake over and over again where I don't, and it's screwed me up over and over. Flee from distraction. So it's a hard thing sometimes to figure out what the best use of your time is. But I see there's so many things, whether they're internal or external, that are vying for your attention. And if you're going to bootstrap and you have limited resources, every minute you need to figure out the best way to allocate your time. I rarely went to an event like this. And I think these can be highly beneficial and very educational, but I didn't go because we needed to execute on our business. And so a lot of people are going to vehemently disagree with me, but I think people over-network sometimes. If you can understand, like, if you can see a path to the end of the rainbow, so to speak, with networking, then do it. But networking for the sake of networking, I think, pulls people out of the execution of their companies, and I think they get distracted sometimes by it. The last thing I was going to say here from an efficiency standpoint is you could suffer and work 16 hours a day and not raise any capital, but if you're foolish in the way that you, I think I'm moving too close here, if you're foolish in the way that you allocate equity to your beginning first employees, it's all that benefit that you get from the suffering of not raising capital, you may see that same amount of dilution or worse in the way that you assign equity. If you cannot get people, so 1% of $1 billion company, people are pretty excited about. But if you communicate to your people that it's only a $10 million opportunity, 1% is probably not enough, so you're going to have to give them 5% or 10%. And so you bleed yourself of equity when you don't create the right vision of the size and the capacity and the opportunity of your business. So the last thing, just to wrap up, is we've all heard this in accounting, but cash is king. So as a startup, you have to learn to fly super close to the treetops. And we did this, oh my gosh, for up until like probably a year and a half ago. We would, right after we make payroll, so our payroll a year and a half ago was probably $3 or $4 million a month, or a month. And at the end of the month, we would usually, before our like billings came in, we'd usually have $1 million left over. So we were sitting on like 7 days of cash for years, literally from 2003 until about a year and a half ago. So I'm really glad to be, a little higher. And we still run tight cash flow. We try to reinvest everything back into the business. You have to make sure if you're going to run tight cash flow, your revenue pull from your customers, you cannot have hiccups. You've got like little things like changing the name of your company. We just found out. People didn't recognize the invoices that came from Entrata instead of Property Solutions, which is the former name. And so we saw a blip in cash flow collections. Little things like that, if you're going to run super tight cash flow, are very critical. Typically with a SaaS company, you go out and you bill on a subscription model. Well, subscription models give you a little bit of cash constantly. They don't give you a big lump sum. And so if you want to be a SaaS company, it's okay to not charge subscription up front. Some of the first deals that we closed, we went out and we offered them perpetually free for eternity licenses to the software if you give me a big fat check right now. And so we paid all our employees in the early days with cash from companies that did that. And we still sell them new software and they pay for it, so we're making good money off those customers, but they're still using those products for free that we gave them over 12 years ago. And I couldn't be more thrilled about it. So anyway, the last thing that I'll say, and I don't have a slide for this, is work your ass off. So I see so many people that think they can pull 40s or 50-hour weeks and start a huge, awesome company. Man, I wish I knew how to do that. I would have got a lot more sleep over the years. But I fundamentally believe that you've got to work your can off to really make a company grow and succeed. Ralph Waldo Emerson has a quote that I love that goes, "Great heights by men both reached and kept were not obtained by sudden flight, but while their companions slept, they were upward toiling in the night." And I think I've probably pulled 2,000 all-nighters in the last 10 years. And it's painful, but if you're willing to commit to that level, you can create unbelievable value for yourselves, for your families, for your investors, for the community. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.